The Starlight Express. Mary Lou sits in the kitchen for the last time, waiting for Walter to come downstairs. She might easily leave, not say goodbye. Walter probably thinks she's gone. He'll be shocked to see her, sitting on the stairs in coat and hat and boots, umbrella across her lap. He'll take it as a sign that she still needs him, that something pure and important about their relationship is still intact. She looks through the banister at the oven clock in the kitchen. 5:02 p.m. A strange time, an unpleasant time. Her eyes travel over housewares, the silver mirror toaster rusted on each corner, rescued from a flea market. "Look how quaint," she'd said. "You want to eat quaint toast?" Walter joked. They bought it, and Mary Lou searched for old-fashioned butters and rustic breads. For a few days, they ate quaint toast. Beside the toaster, the ultra-modern barista coffee machine. Expensive, shining, globular. Walter's choice. She didn't like the coffee's richness, its thoroughness, the pad of cream that surfaced at the end. Beside the barista, propped against the phone-charging brick with its looping mass of wires, she had set the letter from the hospital with the indictment and cancellation of her life. Walter could read it after she had gone. He probably would not. At some point, a doctor or nurse would call to flag a missed appointment. The hospice would call to say her room was ready. Perhaps he would never know, and that might be best. She can hear him in the rooms above shifting boxes. He's an engineer, and there are no words to describe what that means. She pictures him standing in a lab coat in a sealed capsule, holding a silver mechanical pencil. Now he's doing what he always does. Shift heavy things in the rooms above. "What on earth are you doing up there?" she'll always ask. "Oh, nothing," he'll say, "looking for my watch." He'll pause a moment and dutifully wait for her follow-up. There are no follow-ups anymore. He's answered her follow-ups countless times, and nothing he says makes anything clearer. He doesn't wear a watch. She's fairly certain he doesn't own one. 5:04 p.m. Another unpleasant time. She'll come into a room and settle. He'll come into a room and keep going. Adrift, he's off to the next room. "You never sit," she'll say. She can't understand his never-ending movement. Where is he off to? What's in the next room? What is he looking for? "You don't own a watch," she'll say. "Really? You sure?" he'll say. Questions she's asked, which he's answered, which seem, as always, not to be answers at all. Why can't he tell her? At last it comes to her. He doesn't know. He doesn't have an answer, any answer, to any question. Something falls and thumps overhead. She blocks her ears. It's madness. Furniture shifts, boxes stack. She pictures the room he's in, her former study. It's largely empty now, or should be. She emptied it herself. The sounds are impossible. Perhaps he's moving his own things into the room, making it his own, which he said he wouldn't. "This will always be your room," he told her. "Why?" she'd asked. "Because it will always be your room," he'd said. "Are you ghostlighting me?" she'd asked finally. Ghostlighting? She knew it was wrong the moment she said it. She knew it was gaslighting and knew he'd known what she'd meant. Wasn't that gaslighting too? Gaslighting is the trick up the sleeve of everyone she knows. They've all been gaslighting her. What she's not sure is if they know. There's only a spade of truth here. This is a perspective, her perspective, a receiving end problem in a way that turns the problem back to being one of her own making. A trick without a magician, unless she's the magician. She wants to interrogate everyone in a prison setting. A dim bulb dangling in the room, her prisoners manacled, injected with sodium pentothal, truth serum. Now let's get to the bottom of this, she'd say. You don't own a watch. There is no watch. From here on out, there will be no more of that. She's off on a solo adventure to the end of her life. Maybe not a long life, but a real one, anyway, despite the letter on the counter. Somewhere out there, in the mountains or a desert or an island or the sea, she will find a life to live, waiting like a single tree or open clearing for her to come and claim it. An island would be ideal. No man is an island. This woman is. Walter comes down the stairs, smiting every step, hammering each foot down, stomp, stomp, stomp. Is that honestly the manner in which you descend a staircase? Do you mean to break the sound barrier? She wants to say. Oh, Walter says, stepping around her. You're still here. What were you doing up there? She says. I thought the house was coming down. I thought you might have forgotten something, he says. If I left anything behind, it's because I don't want it. I told you, she says. Yeah, but, he says, you don't exactly know what you grabbed or what you left behind. I do, in fact, she says. Okay, he says. Were you looking for something to bring me? No. Call me about? Have you forgotten this book? I found a box of ribbons. I don't know, he says. Maybe. To see if I'd come back? No. Look, just to follow up, maybe. See you're all right. But you're happy I'm leaving, she says. Why do you want to find out anything else? I'm not happy you're leaving. I'm looking forward to not fighting anymore. That's different, he says. I want to make sure you're all right. I am all right. More than that, I am very good. I mean out there on the road, or whatever, he says. I will be more than all right there, too. No need to check. If I left it, I don't want it. Okay, he says. Don't check, she says. Okay, I won't. She hands him her phone. I'll get a new one, she says. Or maybe I'll live without them now. She stands, extends her hand. Goodbye, Walter. He laughs a little, but grows serious and takes her hand and shakes it. It's a children's handshake, badly performed, generous, and poorly done. Goodbye, Mary Lou, he says. She puts a cigarette in her mouth and lights it, exhales a stream of smoke. You're smoking now, he says. She puffs her answer. You don't know me, and I don't know you. I have never been here, and you are make-believe. That's what the smoke and the cigarette mean. Beneath her coat, she wears a brightly patterned dress that does not fall far enough to her knees. The pink and yellow ribbons in her hair flutter in the wind from the open door, and her unwashed hair hangs firm as leather. She has the slumped look of someone just arrived after a long journey, not someone leaving now, forever. She lifts the typewriter case and walks to the door. She likes the idea of leaving with an antique valise in one hand, stepping into the rain, opening a black umbrella, disappearing into the fog in three shapes. The triangle of her dress, the square of the case, the crescent of the umbrella. It will be necessary that she use the typewriter. Everything she takes, she will use. Everything is like a toothbrush. She has not brought a toothbrush. This is not a journey undertaken with accessories. She's heading to the top of Everest. She hopes for endless rainy days and frigid temperatures and hardships and nearing death. A final bit of gaslighting from Walter. As Mary Lou closes the door behind her, Walter lowers into the chair she's never once seen him sit in. Some days later, Mary Lou finds herself where she imagined. Flat, Iowa, perhaps. An endlessly forming highway in the middle of the country. White farms strewn to either horizon, the broad and upward fragrance of cows, but no signs of them. Manure, sour milk, chewed grasses, solitary odors hung side by side like mud and smoke. This is one of any number of end-of-days scenarios she hopes to find. A rolling desert of yellow dunes, a destroyed city become a jungle forest. She frowns as the old bucket shape of a gas station appears ahead. At the far end of the pull-in lot, there's a bird-like flock of dust making open fan shapes beside a fence piece. She checks the gas gauge. Half full, but she longs to stop. Another scenario comes to her. A revision of the apocalyptic desert or overgrown city full of dangerous dogs. The idea appears as natural as something around the bend. Can she live here? Or try to? Work at this gas station? Sleep in a room just off the back? Even on the floor? An old mat, a pillow stuffed with shirts. Eat from the spare shelves. Chips and crinkled bags and sugared cereals with toys at the bottom, old sandwiches wrapped in plastic panes, and more cigarettes than she could ever smoke. She continues down the road until she's sure no one at the gas station with binoculars can see her, and then she pulls to the shoulder. She gets out of the car. The heat makes a pressure on her skin, but the moving air is cool. She leans into the car and turns the engine off. Hears the grass swaying and touching, toing and froing, whistling, though there is no wind. She wonders if the grass moves of itself in the mass of its being, settling on the earth but never quite settled. A movement like the ocean, the strands tipping here and there like dominoes. It's almost a photograph. She's standing in a photo, one hand on the roof, one foot on the doorsill. Click. She is a photograph. The whole world is a photograph. Something like the opposite of an orgasm rifles her body, like God digging through her for a lost star. A painful ache in her jaw, the abscess where the small piece of bone was removed. A shovel goes through her. She likes the roughness of it, the realness. Untouched interiors being probed, her lungs and heart squeezed and rubbed, the nervous nausea that strikes as never-touched things are touched. Her jaw relaxes and the shovel removes. The world sets back into motion, and she fetches her wallet from the passenger seat. She walks into the grasses looking for a rock or piece of wood, but this is farmland, gleaned of oddity, rich soil and meadow grass only, machine scrubbed and single-minded. Across the road is the stray object of a can. She listens for traffic, looks both ways and crosses. A Miller High Life with beer tinkling inside. Suddenly, she needs to pee. She drinks the beer, crumples the can, uncrumples it, and burps. She digs a well in the sandy shoulder, sets the wallet down and buries it. Imagines it's a dead sparrow named Molly. She sets the can over it like a gravestone. "Goodbye, Molly," she says, and begins to cross the road to the car. A shadowy Plymouth Valiant, a crow on wheels. She stops in the middle of the highway, a void place, a stranger's roof, someone else's property. She hikes her dress and urinates in the middle of the road, and then gets back in the car. This is what it's like to do things. This is what it's like to be here. Mary Lou drives north and south along the highway. East or west, she doesn't know. Unknown numbers of days have passed. Not knowing is better than knowing. She has no map or watch or calendar. She wants information to depart, clocks waving goodbye, and facts of all kinds walking off stage. Her plan involves passing the gas station at ever smaller intervals as the fuel needle falls. She allows herself this last piece of information. She needs to time this somehow, without any calculation. She will run out of gas just shy of the pump. A wrinkling paper glide through the fan of dust near the fence piece, come to a stop only she can hear. With every passing of the gas station, her belief that the owner inside is aware of what she's up to grows. He's known all along. He knew the first time she passed that she would pass again and again. He is heavy-faced and grizzled, drunk by noon each day from a supply of beer he takes from a small fridge next to the cash register. He watches every car pass with a pair of binoculars. He sits on a bar stool by the window and swivels and watches. He stills a lens against the glass and turns it like a top. With every pass, she knew more about him. He had sung once in a country band. He turned on a tiny radio to make it homey, like a warm fireplace when anyone entered. "Afternoon," he'd say, regardless of the time. If you were well dressed, he said it quieter. If you were from around here, he called you sir or ma'am. An eighth of a tank remaining. The low fuel alarm has sounded. She doesn't want to look at the miles available to her according to its estimation. She can't afford to fall for its thoughtful safeties, its worried optimism. It's gaslighting. Something Walter said when he hoped for something but didn't do anything to achieve it came from the dog races he sometimes attended. "There goes Swifty." He'd say this after buying a lottery ticket or trying to get a job. She didn't know who Swifty was, but Swifty's departure was an invitation to hope. "There goes Swifty," she says. A vague shape leaps from her mind and down the Valiant's hood and races into the distance. She runs out of gas 2 miles from the station, or 5 miles, more, less. She can see the bucket shape in the distance, a little teapot. The structure is squat, collapsed, rounded. A falling signpost curls above it and makes a pale handle. She sits helpless in the quiet car. This is why Walter never won the lottery or got the job. Swifty ran away. The car continues to creep along the road. The engine is silent and dead, out of gas. But the Valiant won't stop rolling down the road at something like a walking pace. Is it possible that this flat-looking world is tipped? Like a hill of illusion that appears to go downhill, but goes up. Some minutes later, the car softly crushes into the gas station lot. She applies the brakes to stop it in the scenic, quiet paper way she imagined. She pulls the emergency brake to mark the symbolic sound of arrival and steps out of the car. This is what she pictured. She has only to stand here vacantly, as though this is a place she's not permitted to act. She puts a hand to her head to cover the sun and wonders if she looks as though she is saluting a senior officer or blocking the glare. She keeps her eyes turned away from the gas station, but has exquisite peripheral vision. She sees more and better from the sides of her eyes than the centers. Looking at anything directly freezes her mind. She doesn't trust the dead ahead. Only from the peripheries is anything really seen. The heavy-faced owner should come out at any moment, wearing a check shirt and jeans, large untied boots that slap at his legs when he walks, an oil-smeared cap and ruined feathers of hair falling to his shoulders, thoroughly undone and beyond use, like something left behind after the war. He'll finish a beer and toss it into the barrel beside the pump and call out, "Afternoon, help ya?" in a tone that recognizes who she is, a damsel in distress. A phrase she's misunderstood her whole life. Walter had corrected her. "What did you say you are?" he'd said. "A what and a what?" She'd said it 100 times before, leaving the house. I said, "I'm a damsel in distress." "That you are," he said. She'd pushed him to explain why he found this funny. She'd had to go to the library to discover the phrase, damsel in distress. Walter helped insufficiently in these ways. Never gave her the bad news, frown or smile, and then deny anything was off. But she learned enough from these signs. She closes the car door and opens it and slams it again and salutes the sun and hopes she's carrying the gesture off, scanning from the side of her vision for any shadow of Carl's arrival at the station door. From his silence and binoculars and his boots as she passed, she had come upon that name. Carl. She releases the parking brake and pushes the car to roll it into place beside the lone pump. The first pump ever made. An old movie robot with a hand in its pocket and spinning metal numbers for a face. She stumbles, and the car rolls away from her and finds the scant grade of the highway. She walks after it and notices a special darkness inside the station. There is a sign on the door that says, "No, sorry, closed." Handwritten and hard to read, and no punctuation or care between the letters. The Valiant pushes down the highway all alone in the ruts of the road. A powerful thrill of abandonment. She's here alone now. This is actual distress. Because she so recently saluted a senior officer more so than shielded away the sun, she feels she's learned that military gesture more accurately than the other. She salutes her car to send it off and says another saying of Walter's, "Sayonara, sweetheart." She doesn't knock. She doesn't call out hello. She doesn't even try the knob. She lifts a stone and bounces it against the glass. Large, head-shaped. The stone Carl uses to prop the door during 2 hot days. Other windows are broken. She imagines farm boys emerging from the long grass to throw stones from their pockets. Little pecked-out holes and shatters. Wishes and laughter. She tests the rock against the glass. The coming sound is what she doesn't want to hear, the splash of breaking window. In the far side of her vision she sees it, the silver coin of a key in the shadowed space the rock had sat. She drops the rock and takes the key and lets herself inside. Cave quiet, smells of rotten cheese and spent oil and soft fruit. Something ticks, the single stroke of a second hand. Tick. There is a shadowed 3-door refrigerator on the far wall, unhumming and unlit. A sign hangs above it, handwritten, but a better effort from Carl. The Starlight Express, which is either the name of the gas station or the name of the refrigerator or the name of the town, or the road, or a product somewhere nearby. 3 small filled rows stand cow-like with narrow aisles between, chips and cookies and cereal boxes. There is a bar-like register area to the right and a bar stool near the window. She wonders if her peripheral vision discerned the stool during her many drive-bys, whether she sometimes knows things that can't be known. She steps inside and waits until the clock ticks again, and she takes another step and waits. There are liquor bottles shoved together in rows on shelves behind the counter, and a lottery wheel mounted on the wall beside the window that Carl probably spun. He would spin it for every customer if they paid $1 to try their luck, and sometimes a customer would win a full tank of gas, sometimes a few dollars off or free coffee. Bad news, sometimes. Now they had to pay double or triple for the gas. She sits behind the counter in a check shirt she's found hanging on a hook in the hall, and she wears a cap she's found outside near the pump. The hat was beaten flat into the ground, as though every car for years had driven over it when parking beside the pump. She's lifted it out from the earth with archaeological care and set it on her head like a crown, careful to keep the caking sand and grassweed on the cap in case she has to return it. She has her own cigarettes, but from the stubs in the tray on the register, Carl smokes Marlboros, and she takes a red and white pack from the overhead bin and sits smoking. Carl's beer is warm and from a torn case on the floor, not stored in a small refrigerator in easy reach, and she drinks from one can and the next, as from the fountain of life. She continues moving at the slow pacing of time here, and wonders if anyone on earth has ever moved as slowly, this continuously, for as long. Could she become the slowest person who ever was? Could that be who she was? Is that a person someone can be? The pain in her jaw expands and cuts a line down her neck. A new black vein, bulbous and coarse and animal, is there. She touches the coiled grid below her jaw and presses the hard bubbles flat. A police car shoots past like a bolt of lightning, and she makes her way to the window stool in the creeping ticks and sees on a low beam beside cans of motor oil a pair of binoculars. She stares at them and for the first time wishes time might resume its regular gait as the police car grows small in the distance. Tick, tick, tick. Time resumes and the faster ticking helps her find it. An old wooden owl perched near the ceiling with the hour and minute hand spinning from its nose and the second hand leaping second to second as across a bed of river stones. She grabs the binoculars and sets them against the glass and turns them top-like to watch the police car fade in gaseous ripples as though the air is losing its ability to exist. A thrill of danger as the police car swings to the opposite lane and slows beside her still wandering Valiant. The lights spin yellow and orange, and the policeman steps out of his vehicle and grabs tight his brimmed hat and runs toward the Valiant. He opens the driver door and falls, and then rises hatless and charges after it. He tries to tug the car to a halt, setting his feet into the pavement. He runs alongside it for a while. Finding a strange skipping motion he's concocted, he jumps in and steers the car off the road and into the field, where he stops it and climbs out. He raises a hand to his head as Mary Lou had done, saluting the senior officer of the Sun, as he looks to find the car's owner standing somewhere nearby in the field. Mary Lou feels she should pull back and hide. The officer lights his own cigarette, and Mary Lou does too. She watches him smoke and make an inspecting circle around the car. He leans cat-like into each corner of the car, looking for signs of her. Nothing there that could link to her or to the gas station or Walter. A typewriter, an umbrella, nothing more. He extracts this evidence from the car, opens the umbrella and tests it, and then unbuckles the typewriter case and sits for a moment in the grass, astounded. He types out some practice sentences and then takes an envelope from his pocket and extracts a sheet of paper and unfolds it and sets it into the typewriter and types again. He stands and tosses his cigarette and begins to run for his car. Something spotted in his own peripheral vision, another car bearing along. His hat is in the freeway beside his unattended car, the warning lights still spinning. He stops, freezes, throws his arms in the air and races back to the field and crouches through the grass. Maybe to write something new in the typewriter. He stomps on a snake and then lifts the small creature from the field and drools over it, and it is his tossed-away cigarette, which extinguishes in a puff of smoke. He stomps it out and picks it up and stomps it again and runs for his car, clipping a hand to his red sandy hair to keep the idea of his hat from falling off again. Mary Lou feels the new car on the road now and stows the binoculars and returns to the swivel chair behind the register and flips on a light switch as Carl would have done, and the station comes to life. A bubble-shaped car, piecemeal and turquoise, pulls into the station and slows beside the pump. Mary Lou imagines the car rolling over the hat that has always been there. A woman in a maintenance jumpsuit and two braids tied behind her head gets out and stands for a moment beside her bubble car and looks at the tires and beneath the car. She has noticed something in the way the car rests on the rugged sand. She knows the hat has been removed. When the woman approaches the door, Mary Lou turns on the yellow radio with its long antenna on the register, and a Hank Williams song is there like something she digs out from the air, little louder than a buzzing fly. "Afternoon, ma'am," Mary Lou says. Mary Lou doesn't like the woman because the woman doesn't like her. This takes the form of silence. She is middle-aged and reckless and takes 2 large steps. She nods and her face chooses expressions as she walks the aisles and touches bags and boxes as though testing whether they are there, and finally she comes over. $20, I guess, out there, she says, and sets the money on the counter. It is a $20 bill, and there is nothing else to do with it. Mary Lou takes the money and holds it, and the woman looks at the clock and the dark hall in the back and the little radio and tips her head toward it, hearing the buzzing song finally. "Nice hat," she says, and leaves, taking her long strides and sometimes jumping a little as though there are gaps in the earth only she knows about. She stands at the pump and works the pocket arm handle, and Mary Lou hears underground machines shift to life and hiss in the earth below. The woman fits the nozzle into the tank, and Mary Lou watches her watch the metal numbers spin. Mary Lou turns off the radio, and when the woman pulls away, she turns off the lights, and the owl clock resumes its occasional tick. She sits holding the money and hopes time might be done for good. There is such a thing as the slowest person who ever was. Someone could be that person. She might be here right now. This is a good photograph, she thinks. She can live inside this image forever. It was hard to accomplish much in the slow time at the gas station, which Mary Lou thought of as owl time. To sip the beer or bring the cigarette to her lips in alternation were long strokes of an oar in something much thicker than water. She found herself in the ongoing spirit of the act of lifting something small and unimportant that both pleasingly required and naturally took all her available energy and attention. In her former years with Walter, the acts of living were so readily dispatched that she found herself only in the gaps between actions, somewhere with an empty glass, trying not to feel the tiny alien fingers pinching out the growing hole behind her teeth. Maybe that's why Walter swept through rooms and never stopped rummaging and never sat down once until she left. Mary Lou wanted sips of beer and drags of smoke, but in this owl time, the smoke and beer were as difficult to obtain as canyon dwelling, or panning for gold, or sleeping cold beneath the stars. Elemental peace was had in the low-seeming quality and lack of philosophy of drinking beer and smoking cigarettes in a place called the Starlight Express. There were 3 toes missing from her left foot and long welts running between the bones of her left leg from ankle to knee and knee to hip, and one that curved a ridge along her belly and up toward her chest and blended somehow into the black veins in her neck. If this was all there was, could that be enough? You looked and found and became and unbecame and got lost and looked again, and that was all there was. If you were far enough away, the world could just be air and land and water. Some while later, the crow-like object of her Valiant rolled into the lot. The reddish-haired officer sat in the car, but not behind the wheel. He was seated in the passenger seat, and there seemed to be no driver at all. As he got out of the car, he realized he'd forgotten to fetch his hat, due his customary habit of putting the hat on when he got out of cars. And now he stood with a hand lifting air toward his head and looking at his hatless fingers. He stood for a moment gazing down the highway for the chicken shape of his hat, to see that it hadn't blown away, wondering how he'd failed to see it or remember it on the journey back. In the vehicle, Mary Lou saw a second figure, shadowy behind the wheel and hidden by the officer when he'd been seated in the car. The figure bore a distant familiarity, as of a cousin or a long-ago neighbor. Mary Lou speculated on whether it was she herself, or even just her shadow, sitting in the parked Valiant, waiting for her to come and repossess a part of herself left behind. She turned on the lights in the station and flicked the radio to the same Hank Williams song about lonely places and lost souls, as the officer stepped halfway through the door. He could spare only enough time to present a few urgent words before heading off to warn the rest. He spoke, or pretended to. His eyes and ship-like brow rose and fell, and his jaw and lips worked around, and he made the gesture of a greeting and departure to her, with a finger tipped to his forehead, like the tiny wave a mouse might make to another. His voice peeped and whisked at the housefly volume of the radio, and she heard nothing of his words. What compiled was a conflicting buzzing in the air of the officer's voice alongside the buzzing of the song. The radio was one sort of bee with a certain proportional set of wings and sound, and he a second. As he ran off down the highway in the direction of his hat and car, Mary Lou wondered if he'd said anything at all, or had in fact perhaps taken a moment to eat something in her presence. What she'd seen was not communication at all, but the expression of hunger. She flicked off the light and radio and took a fast sip of beer and reached for the cigarette just as owl time resumed. Tick, She made her way across the years to the bar stool, and after a time pressed the binoculars to the glass and watched the officer running down the road toward his car and hat. She startled slightly as he leapt into the air over the same great gaps in the pavement the woman in the bubble car knew about, or perhaps his own small obstacles she could not see. As she watched him run and leap with her eye nearly touching the binocular's lens, her peripheral vision regarded the still figure in the Valiant parked in the lot before her. Still was not the right word for the figure. There was a small life hanging over this person or shadow behind the wheel, a gentle trembling of breathing that aligned with her earlier sense of the naturally unsettled grass. The officer fetched his hat from the road and spanked it against his hip like a tambourine. Before sporting it atop his head, he gave a boy-like jump for joy. This produced a small smile on the side of Mary Lou's face that still moved, and the figure in the car shifted with the same small joy at the boy-like jump of a man returned to his hat. The joy deepened for them both as the officer then removed the hat as instantly as he found himself standing beside his car. The hat could not be worn inside the car, and so he must, at this peak moment of requiting, once more part with it. The yellow light shifted off, and the car spun a wide arc into the fields. The officer made no effort to return to the highway, but drove for some distance through the long grasses. When finally he did pull onto the pavement, she felt the joy of the recent moment fade, and the figure in the Valiant shift back to its hung life of breathing and the small movements of being alive. As the police car came along the road, it brought with it the same drapery of dust that still inhabited the left side of the lot near the fence piece, yellow eddies of curling smoke. As the car sped past the station, the flowing gown of dust shot butter-soft into the air and seemed to twinkle down like the workings of a campfire. The Valiant rolled forward into the grass to follow the police car and found its speed through the free weight of itself and the invisible grade of the highway which sloped in the opposite direction on this side of the road. With the commotion over, Mary Lou sat and smoked and drank in owl time. While focused on the elegies of bringing the can to her lips and setting it down and then taking the cigarette from the tray, she found dual experience was now possible to her. Even while keeping her attention fully on the beer and cigarette, she was now able to review and consider the unusual highlights of the day, including her own arrival at the station, which she viewed from the perspective as Carl would have seen it. She could not remember ever being in the car or leaving the house. Life had begun when the Valiant passed and repassed before her on the road with its increasing frequency until the car rolled in like an old river dying at last. The woman that was herself got out to salute the sun, and to this woman Mary Lou wanted to say, "Come in." Dark in the station and candlelit outside, an orange glow that drops and veils with the passing of time inside. It's such a clear pattern that at some nearing point all light from the sun would be gone. The inner darkness of the station and the outer darkness of the land would seal together, and there would be no inside or outside. Mary Lou took her beer and cigarette and went to the door and walked into the lot to see if she could feel the line that divided outside from in. The only difference was the ground below her feet, sharp and needling. She recalled the sounds of her shoes falling to the floor as she sat on the bar stool at the window, like the dripping of water, 2 drops falling into a sink in a distant room. Down the highway, a single star of light appeared between sky and earth, the first star of the night, but below the line of land. She was seeing through the crust of the earth to things below, or the fields, unlit, had simply vanished. It was not a star, but an earthly light burning roadside like a torch, a phone booth, self-illuminated, on the side of the highway like a strange little man folded into a bus stop, set together into a single object. She steps toward the shadow of the pump and its always rising smell of spilled fuel. Each step across the sandy lot is painful, walking on glass. Her left foot and leg have lost all feeling, but she can sense the impression of the sharp pricks against the sole of her dead foot, the missing toes recoiling. The relief of setting her feet on the road is like slipping into a bath, touching the soft skin of a baby with your cheek. How rigid and tight she has become, how crabbed and crouched. From the moment she left Walter, she'd been drawing down into a fist. Toes first, she walks along the highway. Her slender frame unchambers into standing flame. The phone booth is painted red, mullion the glass walls. The inset panes are no bigger than postage stamps, some cracked, discolored, a kaleidoscope. The red edges of the box luster with the energy and metal of a car. The phone booth has been carved out of the shape of a red car. Breezes run down the channel of the road and ripple the edges of the grass, and her dress flaps this way and that as the swishing cape of a bullfighter. The cows are sleeping now. Their smell is not an odor, but a fragrance, not the eaten grass or manure of the day, but rough brown breaths, the clean dirt of their sleeping skin. Their closed eyes smell of fallen leaves. She opens the phone booth and steps inside, and the door strikes shut behind her. The booth is windless, and there is the catching flame scent of an oven. A small, bright world. She hasn't been so deeply inside anything in some time. The phone is ringing, but the ring is a muffled cricket call. She takes the phone from its cradle to stop the clicking, and thinks to let it hang in the air. Nothing to say to anyone, and no desire to listen. The familiar draw of answering a phone takes hold. A rope has been pulled, and she must pull back. Walter took her bowling once, and she'd sat like a child as he'd removed her shoes. He tied on the rented shoes and carried her to the lane, set the heavy ball in her hands. She was almost asleep with medication, but had to stay awake a while longer. This was Walter's solution. The only way to sleep was to bowl. She'd taken 2 steps and dropped the ball and watched it slip into the pins. She'd gone stumbling down the alley toward the dark recess where she wanted to go, into that darkness, to be gathered together and reset. She brings the receiver to her ear and listens to the small offshore winds inside. She is listening to listening itself, to someone listening who is listening to her. "What?" she says. "You go first." "Certainly I will," says a voice. It is the voice of an old farmer who lives in one of the far-flung homes. His name is Old Frederick. Old Frederick tells her if she looks this way or that way, she'll be able to see his porch light. The old farmer is looking for Carl. Has she seen Carl? Carl's name isn't Carl, but something like Danner or Richard or Ranford. It isn't a name that Mary Lou can accept, so she corrects each instance of the name out loud, says Carl each time old Frederick says Danner or Richard or Ranford. From indifference or efficiency, old Frederick adjusts and begins to call him Carl. "Carl was supposed to come and get me here and there around the place," old Frederick says. "Tell me watch television, get my supper, get me off to bed at a reasonable time, but he isn't show." "He's not here," Mary Lou says. "I don't know where he is." "Well, where is he?" old Frederick says. "Where could he be?" Mary Lou says. "Well, you tell me," old Frederick says. He has a snake in mud sort of voice, warm and so worn out that Mary Lou hears it like a sound of animals, like the lowing of a cow or the bark of a dog or the purr of a cat. "I called as a last resort," old Frederick says, "because I thought something must have got him. What I thought was maybe he'd be crawling toward the phone box with a busted ankle. Turned my porch light on, called the booth to give him hope that someone was out there ready to do what's needed. That when he did arrive near dead as I pictured him, he'd be able to tell me he was hurt and needed help. For once I could be of use to him and call for help. Though I don't know who I'd call, 'cause mostly I would have called him." Old Frederick stops to let that part of the story take hold, like a Polaroid forming colors. "If you picture it," he continues, "there's not much else I can do. If he was on fire right before me, I'd be pressed to put even a little of that fire out. I hate the idea of him burning to death before my eyes. Worse than that, the idea that he'd see me laying here on the floor, not moving a muscle to help put him out, because the only help I could offer would be a kind of frown upon my face." Mary Lou pictures Carl burning up before old Frederick, and then alerts to her own presence in the phone booth Carl might be crawling toward. She opens the booth door and steps into the night to see if Carl is laying nearby or crawling through the grass. "I don't see him anywhere," she says, and old Frederick says, "Well, that's good or bad, I can't tell." "What should we do?" Mary Lou asks. "Well, let's not panic yet," old Frederick says. She can hear in the stateliness of his tone that old Frederick once had been a leader of the people, a daily arrival of one farmer or farmer's wife or one of their children to old Frederick's homestead, finding him in the field or in the hayloft or standing with his cows. The passing of gossip or local concern about the weather or a blight or a disagreement between neighbors. Old Frederick observing a way that things might reconcile or be acted upon that would allow everyone to take the next steps forward together. "I'm not the only one he visits, of course," old Frederick says, "and it's his business, of course. I imagine his list has grown too long for one man to handle. He bit off a bit more than he can chew, is what I mean. I suppose it's us who bitten off a bit too much at Carl." Mary Lou listens, and old Frederick listens back. She wonders if they are listening for each other, or for signs of Carl crawling through the grass or burning up in a distant farmhouse, or making his tired way along the highway, finally headed home after a long day of whatever Carl did. "Tell you what," old Frederick says, "I won't be much good to anyone if I don't eat or get off the floor and get myself to bed. So you can come and set me right for the evening, and in the morning we can make a plan to find our Carl." "How will I know where you are?" Mary Lou says. Old Frederick laughs. "That's the easy part," he says. "Hang up, step outside, and look for my light, and we'll figure something out." He hangs up. Mary Lou sets the phone back in the cradle to the sound of a cracking egg and pushes through the door and stands in the middle of the road until she hears a single gunshot in the distance beyond the gas station. She sees no porch light in that direction, but she moves toward the sound. She sets her hand to her head to keep the officer's hat from flying off and runs down the highway toward the sound of the gun, which stays in her mind like a bolt of lightning shot into the earth and shining out her destination. Here and there she leaps over unseen gaps in the road, as the woman and the officer had. She runs into the fields toward the lightning post in her mind, and old Frederick's house stands like a piece of hazy moonlight between clouds. The earth is soft as beach sand, but furrowed in long lanes, and she makes her way down the lanes and over the furrows. A hunched-over, white-painted farmhouse with heavy black roofs ascending in mountain peaks and a single low sash of windows, as though it was just a one-floor structure that opened like a church or cathedral. There is a lamp-post outside the door, but unlit, and the bulb is broke. A stone pillar stands near the door with a knot of iron to hitch a mule, and a mattress stone lays in the ground as a stair before the door, and as she touches her hand to the knob, she finds the door unlocked. Never has she felt the doorknob turn so gently, handled so emptily, as though soon it would not be a door at all, but something like a curtain that blew open for the arrival of anyone. She moves toward the only light inside, which reaches down the walls and shows the image of a boat on a painted plate on the wall. She goes down the hall into more light. Old Frederick lays like a puddle on the floor in a boy's cowboy costume that fit him nowhere right. Spurred boots are tucked with his dark jeans, a red-threaded white shirt, and blue kerchief around his neck. Sprawled as he is, the old farmer still wears his cowboy hat and has to lift his head from the floor to keep it on. He is smiling brightly and lacks teeth and looks as though he fell off his mule and needs a hand up so they can continue their journey on. There is a pistol near his hand, and he wears a holster around his waist. There is a fallen-over table and an old black telephone set on his chest. His left hand is covered in a large burned glove, and there may be no hand within. He is pointing weakly back with the glove toward a picture frame window, which he shot out with the pistol more than once. Shooting out this window is his occasional invitation for company or help. "Here she is," old Frederick says, and they reach for each other, but his arm falters and falls to the floor. "Here's the plan," he says, though no plan comes. Mary Lou kneels behind his head and begins to curl him forward from the floor like a roll of linoleum. While she rolls him, old Frederick grips the phone to his gut and says, "Here we go, all the way, that's it." When he is slumped atop himself, the phone rings and his jolt goes through them both. He claws the cradle and tips the receiver into the glove and lets his whole head fall until it sets upon the phone. He says, "I know, my dear, I know, but we're taking care of it now. Listen. No. Take it from me, all's well, soon as it is. We're taking care right now, and all will be well. Okay? Okay? That's right. Okay. Cavalry's coming." He hangs up. Mary Lou sits beside him and finds herself copying his slumping form, as though huddling together in this way is how they'll find Carl. "That was my Alice, who lives next door, and I call her my girlfriend. She called me her lover just for fun," old Frederick says. "About once a month, Carl wheels her over here or helps me over there and sets us together for supper, but mostly we don't eat but just hold hands and kiss sometimes." Old Frederick lets this Polaroid take color before continuing. "We are friends that kiss and hold on tight, is what it is," he says. "And after I'm sorted, I think Alice needs to use the facilities, is what she said, or has used them and didn't exactly want me to know, and needs a hand over there for a cleanup on aisle 6. Once that's squared away and I'm rested up, we can don our thinking caps and figure out how to rescue our Carl from whatever has befallen him. If you fetch my stick, that'll be a start." Mary Lou looks about the room until she sees a cane in a brass stand by an empty fireplace, and she brings it over and slides it into the gloveless hand. "Okay," old Frederick says. "Here's the thing about me. I got one strong part left, and it happens to be my good left arm. What we'll do is, I'll get my stick propped here to the side of my guts, and then you take me by the middle and push me hard toward the end of my stick. The point is to roll me over it. My good arm will seem like a wild beast. You'll feel that and hear that, and I'll make a lot of noises, but that's just me and my good arm figuring it all out. All you do is push toward the place my stick is aimed, and you'll get me standing up in no time." Mary Lou takes him around the chest and smells old Frederick's country candle smell and feels the single power of his good arm fighting in all directions as she lifts and pushes, and soon they are together losing a fight across the floor as though she is trying to push him down a hole and he is trying not to let her. But something catches like a struck match, and old Frederick rises like the beam of a new barn. They stand exhausted and sweating and chiding a bit from the wrestling. Old Frederick kisses the top of her head, and Mary Lou pulls away. She's no Alice. "The next trick," he says, "is that I can't walk for a dam. I can stand for a dam, but it's mostly down to my good arm keeping me up." Old Frederick plants himself over the stick like a kind of acrobat who might soon rise into the air to balance over the stick on his one strong arm. Mary Lou wraps herself around his weaker side like a blanket, and his arm with the glove hand lays atop her. His feet shuffle, and she takes him along to the bed set too close to the fireplace for there ever to be any fire. He pitches forward and dives to the mattress and lands face down in the whirl of the blankets as far atop the bed as he can manage. She swivels his legs across the mattress and rolls him twice, removes his hat, which he fights against and loses on purpose with his weak arm, and she lifts his head and sets a pillow beneath. "Now I guess it's supper time," he says. Mary Lou turns on a hall light and a kitchen light when she arrives in the small low room with the sink and stove, and takes a small plate out from under a display glass with a husk of bread and a square of butter set upon it. After further instruction from old Frederick, she finds a cold frozen flask in the freezer and brings these to him. "Moonshine," he says as he tips the flask to his lips. He passes the frozen glass back to her so he can eat, and she switches the flask between her hands, it is so cold. Old Frederick takes pinches of the bread and rubs them on the butter and draws each piece to the corner of his mouth and tucks it in like a cotton ball until one side of his cheek is jutted. "Alice can tell you," old Frederick says, squeezing at the wad of bread in his cheek. "She can tell you his general route. She's the one in charge of who needs what around here. She'll even know if he needed to head into Mount Olive or this or that, and that's where he could be. She might know about his mule or wagon because he tells her some of these things, because maybe he could have broke down somewhere or been about to." He sips at the bread in his cheek until it's gone, and then he takes the flask to wash it down. "I mostly needed to get up off the floor and eat and get to bed and tell you about Alice. I could have told you on the phone to go to Alice right away as a faster path to find our Carl, but Alice don't have a pistol and probably wouldn't shoot out a window, so how would you ever find her? She'd fire a pistol, no doubt, but wouldn't have the heart to break a good window, and that's the most important part. But I like a little breeze." Mary Lou asks how she'll find Alice, and old Frederick smiles. "You can use our good old rope," he says. He sips from the flask and smears more bread and fills his cheek up and sips at the bread and falls asleep just like that, without telling Mary Lou anything more about the good old rope. After a lap around the house, Mary Lou walks directly into the good old rope and has the wind knocked from her. It is a thick sailor's rope tied from the back door to the trunk of a tree, and for some time Mary Lou glides her hand over it, feeling it damp and sharp, and giving her little cuts until she walks alongside it, letting it rub along her waist and dress. As it leads her tree to tree, the heat grows at her waist, and she gathers a piece of bark and holds it to her hip to shield the friction. After a time, the campfire smoke rises up her side. It must have been that sometimes either old Frederick or Alice would make their own way to each other by means of the good old rope without Carl's assistance. Alice in a wheelchair, pulling herself over the path they'd made with wheels and shuffling feet, which was smoothed and dug out in a way suggesting both. Old Frederick, in his turn, wearing the burned glove that hid, or was his hand, dragging himself to her somehow, with his shuffling steps, tipping his weight over his good arm as the rope burned the glove until it released a leather smoke. At last she glides along the final stretch of the good old rope through the woods, and a blue milk wall appears with a small window inset. A candle burns in the window, and in the light of the candle the smiling face of Alice appears, her hair tumbled in a cloudy bloom. Alice knocks softly at the glass with her nails, and when Mary Lou is standing before her, Alice continues to tap. The old woman's eyes are fogged white, which frees something in Mary Lou, and she finds herself smiling back and arranging her own features to match Alice's, and taps on the glass to let the old woman know she's arrived. To which Alice says, "Thank the good fucking Lord." Mary Lou walks around the house and finds no door, but an empty space where a door once was. She walks through the space and stands in a ruined room with leaves and sticks scattered on the rug and rocks and mud in natural piles, as though here is a shore the world washes over, testing for a beach. There are doors to the left and right with a clay vase beside each filled with flowers. On the far side, a large tree trunk has come down through the wall and broken this room into a breezeway or antechamber, or reclaimed it partly to the forest. But this had once been Alice's kitchen, an egg-shaped refrigerator and black iron stove, and two tipped-over chairs beside a table. As Mary Lou opens the door to the bedroom, Alice calls out, "Warning! I peed the bed." Mary Lou hesitates before inhaling the air, but the room smells of roses and lilies, which are set in another clay vase on a bedside table. "Alice?" she says, and Alice turns from the window and blows out the candle and sits in the darkness smiling. "Oh, I should have kept it lit," Alice says. "I'm sorry, but I'm always afraid I'll set my hair on fire, and I hate that smell so much. An embarrassing smell, worse than death, I think," she says. Mary Lou finds a light switch on the wall and flicks it on, but no light comes, and Alice strikes a match and relights her candle. "I haven't had power since the tree came down and took my kitchen away and blew my front door off somehow, but I don't know what to do about our Carl," she says. Mary Lou goes to the bed, as she used to go to her mother's bed as a girl, and says, "Well, let's get you fixed up." Her mother had what she now has, and the black lines on her neck are the ones that bulge from her own now, like snakes to strangle her breath. She pulls the sheets from the old woman and finds her naked underneath, and lifts her out of the bed and takes her into the bathroom, and with a wet rag cleans the old woman up. She finds a nightgown hanging on a rope with a week of nightgowns in a row at the ready and dresses her. There's a plastic fitting over the mattress puddled with urine, which Mary Lou swings into a bag, and she drops all the wet things into the kitchen and returns and remakes the bed from a pile on the chair. This pile was made by Carl, as was the row of nightgowns on the rope. As Alice sits in her wheelchair and Mary Lou prepares the bed, Alice sings a few small notes, one after the other, like the first words of the songs she knows, which, when sung together in this way, sound less like music and more like memories. "And now, of course, I have to go again," Alice says, and laughs. Mary Lou helps her into the bathroom once more, and this time returns her to the bed, and Alice reaches her hands roughly out to feel Mary Lou's face, but Mary Lou retracts. "I bet your face feels full and nice in the hand," Alice says, when no face joins her reaching fingers. "No," Mary Lou says, "it's just a face." "Wouldn't it be nicer if we were closer?" Alice says. "No," Mary Lou says, and sits in the wheelchair and rolls back toward the door. Alice sinks into herself and pulls the sheets over her head and covers herself, and when Mary Lou comes to draw them down, Alice wraps her arms around her until their cheeks touch, and soon Mary Lou stops trying to get away and lets her arms fall. Now and then, Alice turns to kiss her on the cheek, as though they are fretting together aboard a sinking ship, and Mary Lou pulls at her, as though to take her down into the sea. "Okay, then," Alice finally says. "Of course, he could be anywhere. We know that from the get-go. I can tell you all the names of everyone in town, but that won't help us figure out where he is. My best guess is he's digging cemetery holes for whoever just died, and that whole end of things." "He could be digging?" Mary Lou says. "He could be," Alice says. "I could listen for that?" Mary Lou says, and Alice kisses her. "You could," Alice says, "but it makes me think of another thing to do, which is to make the big call." The big call was done by the cell phone set on a plate beside the roses in the vase. "It should be charged full. That's my obsession," Alice says. "I always make sure Carl charges it full, 'cause I don't have power here. And what you do is pick it up, and you hit the big button on the top, and then the other big button, and the big call goes out to everyone on the list." It wasn't a phone call exactly, but more like a roll call. 80 numbers were dialed, and a call went out to everyone on the list, and all they had to do was answer the phone and hang up. If there's anyone who don't answer, that's a phone that keeps on ringing, and that's how we know sometimes who it is that's gone, Alice says. Mary Lou lifts the phone and hits the 2 buttons and listens to it ring. Tiny clicks along the line, and words of complaint and irritation as the different men and women on the list answer and hang up, bothered not so much by the call, but by what it means. "Not me," some of them say. "I ain't dead." "So just set it down and don't hang it up, but let it ring, and you go out and listen. If there's someone dead, you'll hear their phone still ringing, and if they're dead, Carl could be digging them a grave," Alice says. Mary Lou is in the night and running through fields in a lining pattern down the furrows, and when she gets to the road she begins to walk and slow and tips her head to listen for the sound of a phone ringing somewhere or a shovel hitting dirt. It's dark cold, a black ocean. Mary Lou starts from the door in a run, but finds that makes her deaf to the sound she's after. She stops to listen, then walks quietly to hear all she can from anywhere. Meadow frogs call in strings and dots, crying baby foxes in the forest, dreamy grasses rolling over and under to make their own wind. Across the field near the road her head falls to look at the darkness below. Her eyes close for sleep until she comes to the pavement and the cinder smoke rises, the scent of her feet on tar. She opens her eyes. A range of pearls bloom from the decks of a black ship. It is a pyre, she sees. The nearer she gets, the more it smells of a house burned down. Everything in a house ripping into flames. The house roars like a waterfall, and the fire spills out windows in cascades. Angels, diving to escape, are swept into the sky. Between blazing wings, the black bones of the house dissolve into shadows. Timber crashes and windows shatter mid-air, not like breaking glass, but ripping paper. Heat from this far away. Standing beside her is a shovel leaning into a man, waiting for the house to burn to the ground so he can begin digging out its treasure. "Is what she wanted," Carl says and shrugs. He drives the shovel into a small pile. There's an open grave half filled in the glow with its own piled earth beside it. Carl shovels the dirt neatly with a spiffing sound, and each shovelful looks exactly the same, feeding a baby with small, perfect spoonfuls. Something catches her like an itch in the air, and she moves deeper into the heat until she hears a bleating cry in the center of the inferno. a ringing phone. When Carl has filled the grave, he pats the dirt down with the shovel. Then he removes his boots and ties the laces together and walks barefoot atop the ground and stomps at the earth and jumps on it in a tantrum. He begins a kind of gardening, yanking out spidery clumps of grass and setting these on the grave to take root, perhaps. He sets his tied boots down in the new garden grass and takes her hand and says a prayer of farewell. She tries to remove her hand, but he won't release it. She lets it be limp, and he holds it like a rag. "Emmeline was 92, he says, and she wanted me to know that and tell others that she was. He looks at Mary Lou and says it again. Emmeline was 92. And he smiles at the humor of keeping his word to a woman just gone. But in fact, she was older than that and was 95, I believe. I know that, or think I do, because she's been here some 3 years, I guess, and was 92 when she first arrived. But let's stick with her a while more and say it was 92. Let me also say I believed her each time she told me, which was each day, which she also said was her birthday, so I'd wish her one. She's the one person in my life I wished happy birthday the most, even though I knew the truth and never actually knew her real birthday. She liked to have tea in the mornings that she made herself and didn't want my help. It took her nearly half the day to prepare, and she'd sit by the window and listen to the birds, though I never saw one. She had a bird cage. I linger on such things because those who knew her would be happy to remember how she was. Carl pauses for a moment's recollection. Mary Lou looks over the orange lane darkness, back to the fire itself, for signs of a congregation gathering beyond the taper of light. In the afternoons, she made herself toast for supper, and that took a hell of a long time, too. She'd watch TV, standing at the wall for a spell, even though that was hard on her, too. Getting her old set up and running, which buttons to press, standing. She's the rare sort among us who grew more into who she used to be long ago, the longer she lived. She's a girl 5 by the time she passed, I'd say. I don't mean through loss of mind, but a kind of perseverance. I never knew what to make of it myself. She spoke more and more, as a little girl might. I'd hear her giggling to herself as I knocked on the door. Made me smile and laugh. What that means is she wasn't a Mad Hatter, I'd say. Yes, she had tea parties and listened to birds who weren't there, and it was always her birthday, but she'd worked out for herself how to be merry. She was as merry as anyone could be. Stuck in her bed or sat on her porch or struggling over the kettle or the toaster or fiddling with that TV, standing at that wall. But she didn't need nothing else but to sit somewhere to be happy. Maybe that's how come she persevered how she did. All the things she did, like wash her hands and make toast, was more to keep me off her back so I wouldn't pester her about eating and keeping clean. He pauses here and smiles, and the fire flickers bright, and Mary Lou copies his smile and pulls her hand from his. I'm too young to do what she did, and too busy being the man I think I am to imagine the thought of becoming a boy again. But who knows, he says. There is almost laughter here in the dark beyond the firelight. Let me say this. When I turn 92, I plan on staying 92, so thank you, Emmeline, for that, Carl says. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years into my 92nd year, who knows? Maybe I'll take out the marble collection I started when I was 5. I kept it in a sack and thought I had all the best ones in the world, and that's all I remember about being a boy. Anybody else? Carl turns and takes the shovel from Mary Lou, and she stands on the precipice of needing to say a few words about a woman she never knew, who lay somewhere in the burning fire before them. She waits on that edge, as though at any moment she'll dive right in. She wants to say that no one should ever be burned, no one ever buried, There must be another way no one has thought of yet. She feels her mouth fall apart to confirm to those who've gathered and to Carl that her words are too hard to find. The end shouldn't be hot in a fire or dark in a hole, but more of the kind of day you had. In the morning there's tea and birds, Carl says, and the light is like peace and the air is like happiness. In the afternoon there's toast and television, and the taste is like peace and the sound is like happiness. In the evening she's gone. Her telephone is still ringing. Her house is on fire. She doesn't want to answer it. She wants it to burn to the ground. The ringing like peace, the fire like happiness. Carl nods and takes her hand, and she lets him, and raises his other and closes his eyes and says, "She was 92. She is 5 years old. Happy birthday, Alight." Mary Lou hears the pull of recitation and says it with the rest of them. "She was 92. She is 5 years old. Happy birthday, Alight." Carl takes the shovel back and lifts his tied boots from the grave and walks toward the fire. Mary Lou follows until the heat begins to loosen her dress and hover it light on her body. The air around her lifts her feet from the ground, and she tips away in the grass wind like a balloon and begins to flow back toward the cold. Carl walks closer into the fire until finally he chucks the shovel like a spear into the flames, then, spinning 2 circles, releases the discus of his boots. When he comes back, he turns from the fire and for a moment takes her hand to confirm that they will leave together and says, "It was her shovel, and she gave me them boots." They creep overland at some distance from each other, strangers in a desert heading by chance in similar directions. But they are together now. There are times when Carl stops to rest for a few moments to catch his breath, and when he does, she stops too. And when she stops to relieve herself, Carl goes off and turns away to give her privacy and waits for her to catch up before continuing. At some point, Carl stops again and turns to her, heavy-breathed, and says, "I could talk. You heard me back there, but I'm too tired to talk and walk at the same time. But feel free." They walk for some time, and Mary Lou finds some questions she might ask, but doesn't. Did he see her driving by the gas station? Did he know, before she did, that she'd stop? How did he come to be here at the station himself? Is this his hat on her head? And if so, did he lose it or leave it in the lot to be run over? These aren't the first questions to ask someone, but later ones, spots downriver they haven't come to yet. "I'm Mary Lou," she says. And then she says, "Keep walking," because Carl has stopped and looks ready to spill the beans on his own name, which is Danner or Richard or Ranford, and Mary Lou can't have Carl with a different name than Carl. "If I could call you Carl instead of anything else, that's what I'd like," she says. It may be the first thing she's ever asked of the world. She stops so he can answer, and when they are both stopped, she feels the earth's cold shoes close around her feet. She is sinking into the ground, and the coldness reaches the metal hinges in her ankle and knee and hip to make 3 small chunks of ice she wants to melt with her hand. Carl takes half of a deep breath and sinks himself into the cinders and says, "Carl, it is." Their feet touch the pavement of the road and they come side by side. Their bare feet skiff the tar to the sound of far-off digging. There is no more heat from the fire, nor can they hear its crackling weather. Now and then, a forest collapse of one room or another, and a window splash, and the brightness of sparks overcomes the air behind them. In the distance, a pistol glint turns into the image of the house burning down again. Apparently, they've turned in the darkness and are heading back to the house. Maybe Carl has more things to throw in the fire. So taken is she with the glass portrait of the house burning down and how they don't draw any closer to it, that she slams into a wall that turns out to be her car. The Valiant on the road like another cutting of darkness there the whole time, the fire reflected in its side window. She steps back angry and looks at the racing glass orange to see what happened from her earlier steps to now, to tell herself what it is and what it was when she didn't know. Carl gets in and sits behind the wheel. This is her car, or was, but because she'd lost it to the grade of the hill, and because Carl hasn't started the engine and can't, the car doesn't feel really hers anymore, but more like something that isn't a car, not something anyone can own anymore. It's an old boat drifting at sea, which they've both swum to after the sinking of their own ships. She hears Carl open his own door again to get out, and she says, "No, I'm fine," and gets in herself as he stands a moment longer half out the door. "Did you think I wanted you to open my door like a gentleman?" she says. "No," Carl says. "I was going to see if you wanted to drive. Maybe I should have thought to do so. I haven't been too polite for a while now and forgot how, I guess. Do you want to drive?" "No," she says. "Do you want me to get out and open the door for you like a gentleman?" "No," she says. "Mary Lou," he says, to print it firmly before them both. "Yes." "And I'm Carl," he says. "That's politeness there," she says, "allowing me to call you that. Thank you." "Feels too easy to be polite," he says. "You should know when you're being polite, and I didn't know I was. Still don't." Carl releases the parking brake and the car begins to roll down the grade. "I'm reaching out my hand for a handshake with you," Carl says. Mary Lou lifts the hand and pushes it along until she feels his leg, and then startles and apologizes, and his hand finds hers, and they shake. "This used to be my car," Mary Lou says. She thinks he knows, but she wants to be sure. "It still is," he says, and he takes his hands from the wheel and lets the car roll itself along the wheel ruts in the highway. "I have your hat," Mary Lou says. She takes it off and tries to find some light to show it in. "My hair doesn't want a hat no more," Carl says, and rubs at his head to set his hair free and drops his hands back to the wheel as she returns the hat to her head. His arm's out the window and his gloved hand taps the roof. Mary Lou watches the windshield for signs of rain. They pass the hallmark light of the phone booth. Mary Lou hears it ringing again as they come alongside it. "Tell old Freddie it was Emmeline, and we're headed home now, and we'll be by tomorrow," Carl says. Mary Lou opens the door and steps out of the moving car and enters the phone booth and watches the car roll off as she answers. "It was Emmeline," she tells old Frederick. "That's who we thought it might be, but didn't want to say our guesses out loud," old Frederick says. "Seems cruel to make guesses even when you're pretty sure. Though I tell you what, Alice always thinks it's probably me to go next, and I always think it's her. We both hope to go before the other, so we don't have to think about that. But honestly now, I hope she goes first, because I think I can take it better at this point. I wasn't sure for a while, but now I am. It's a race, see who can get there first. Don't tell her I said it, but if I have anything to say about it, I'm going to let her win." Mary Lou doesn't get back in the car, but walks beside it like it's a kind of dog she's walking. The image comes to her of ancient man moving over the plains, a hunter long ago walking beside the animal he intends to kill. He lures a prehistoric cow-like creature away from the pack until the old cow knows nothing but that life is now a long walk beside you. The sun rises above Emmeline's burning house as though it's born each day from a house burned down. The gas station brightens into form, and Carl climbs out of the car and joins her. He reaches for her hand and touches it, and she steps out of reach before his fingers can close. They walk together over the dusky lot into the darkness of the station with its swirling eddy near the fence piece, and the car rolls off down the road. Carl turns on the lights and the radio and sings along with the small, lonely song. He opens a beer and sets his digging glove down beside the other on the counter. "Help yourself," he says, and sips his beer and lifts a cigarette from the ashtray that Mary Lou thinks she herself lit in the early evening before heading off into this long night, which hadn't so much as ended as rolled away like the Valiant down the road. Have you ever heard of someone who lives flat on the page? Carl says. He's sitting in the chair behind the register, and Mary Lou is on the bar stool, both drinking and smoking. Mary Lou wants to say, "flat on the page," because the words don't make an image for her as far as a person. If she says them aloud, Carl will think she's asking him a question or is curious, and she doesn't want to hear anymore. She blows out a smoke of sound with her breath, filled with a moan that means she's done listening to things for now. "My wife said it about me before I left to come here," Carl says. "She said I was the sort of man who lived flat on the page, and she hoped I'd find a way to stand on my own 2 feet and see there was no page. 'Get up,' she'd say, like I never got out of bed. Or even after I got out of bed, I was still laid down in a sheet, or page, I guess. It took her a long time to come up with that, because she thought of me as a type of nobleman when we met. Not regal, but I kept a straight back and looked you in the eye and said my thought, good or bad. Often I just said yes or no. At some point she said, 'You know, you feel flat to me.' I guess I was following the rules like everyone else, but maybe unlike everyone else, that's all I did. 'Get up,' she'd say, like I'd only ever been the drawing of myself. Flat on the page. How about you?" Mary Lou had settled herself into listening to a longer story about being flat on the page, and doesn't like that he's turned the tables on her. She could moan again or say "flat on the page" or even "get up." But she'd rather put an end to any discussion about her because she doesn't know the answers. "No one ever tried to say anything about me," she says, "but I didn't want them to. I wasn't ready to be spoken of, and I'm still not." "How come?" he says. "I don't know. 'Cause I haven't come here yet. 'Cause I'm still trying to make my way back." "To what?" Carl says. "To here, I guess," Mary Lou says. "You're here now," Carl says. "And you're not flat on the page," she says. "And you're not on the page at all," Carl says. "Maybe you had no rules. I had a lot of rules. Did you have rules at all?" "I don't know what a rule is," she says. "What do you mean?" "I mean, get up in the morning, eat breakfast, get dressed and have coffee, get in the car, go to work, do your job right and eat lunch and go home, pay your bills and vote," Carl says. "They're all lined up, one after the other, and easy to follow. Gail said I lived a checklist life." "Oh, is that next on the checklist?" she'd say. Carl finishes his beer and sets it down empty, and then gets off the chair and lies on the floor. "There's a bedroll in the back if you want, and I'll make coffee in the morning," he says. "That your checklist again?" Mary Lou asks. "That you, Gail?" he says. He stands again and fetches the can quietly into the bottom of a trash barrel and takes a last sip of smoke from his cigarette and turns off the radio and lights and lies back down. I get thrown off by the littlest thing, he says. Tidy up, radio off, lights out, hit the hay. But then I forgot to get the bedroll down for you, 'cause it's rolled up in the back, and I got thrown off course and got the order wrong. Hit the hay came first, and my whole system broke down just like that. Get up. Carl stands a third time and takes another sip of smoke and waves her toward the darkness in the back. There is a hall beyond the opening that leads to the bathroom. The hall will be her bedroom. Carl unrolls a pad hung on the wall from the row of hooks Mary Lou had taken the shirt from. Inside the pad is a shawl and chair cushion, and after he unrolls it, Mary Lou lies down with her head poking through the hall opening. If you want peace and quiet, I'd face the other way, Carl says. He sits on the floor and slowly falls back, and Mary Lou thinks, flat on the page. She looks down toward her bare feet and the toilet door. It's a room she can smell clearly enough where she is, and she likes seeing the sun touching through the glass. Peace and quiet from what? She says, and turns her head to face him. The specks of Carl's eyes look back. He's laid on his side on the floor behind the counter, arms entwined. From me, he says. I don't mind, she says. Say that now, he says. You snore? She says. I wish, he says. Talk in your sleep? She says. Talk myself to sleep, he says. I don't know what that is, she says. Like counting sheep, I guess, but I chit-chat about what I gotta do tomorrow, what I did today, me and my checklist, I guess. Even with no one here? She says. Yup, he says. Maybe I'll be louder or quieter with a guest. Could be I speak up if you seem like you're listening. I could try not to do it, but I don't know that I can. They lie for a time, listening and waiting. The sun lights the top of the room with the look of illuminated glass. The owl clock ticks quieter, as though sleeping itself. How come Emmeline wanted her house burned down? Mary Lou says. It was ruined anyway, Carl says. It's hard to tell when something ruined is on fire, but it was falling to pieces anyway. I'm no good at cremation, and she wanted cremation. It's just something that's too hard for me, but I can set fire to a house, no problem, if it's someone's last wish and not mine. But you buried her, Mary Lou says, and hears the dropping teaspoons of dirt into the grave. Ha! I buried a hole, Carl says. A lot of what I do is try to keep my word about things. I buried her husband, Jesse, a year back. He didn't want fire for himself or her. That was the main thing they fought about. Well, he fought and she let him. He just hollered about this idea that he needed her to be laid to rest beside him in the end. I was on his side a bit because of how lonely it made him. I'll be there all alone, Jesse would say, and you'll be entirely gone. I want you laying beside me, Emmeline. How come you don't want that? Carl slides closer along the floor, and Mary Lou shifts the cushion out the door so they can talk in the way Jesse and Emmeline did in the close quarters of their bed. Carl places his hands into the passing sunlight as though to make the shape of the story he's telling, and though she watches his hands carve out figures and take different forms, she can't see anything added to the story he tells. Jesse had me dig out a pair of graves to prove his point and had a stone made with both their names to be put on top when the time came, which is what we can do tomorrow. Put that stone down, Carl says, close. Before Jesse died, Emmeline decided not to clearly say whether she'd be burned or buried, but instead would only tell him that the hole on the right was hers and the one on the left was his. That was as close as he was going to get, and he took it. Carl's hands push together in the sunlight and separate, and one of them begins to dig, and the other goes still, and Mary Lou sees something in the shape of Jesse's burial. Jesse also believed that he'd be allowed by God to hear me fill in her plot beside him, Carl says, and that he'd not be able to rest until he heard the shovel hit and the dirt filling it back up. Once her hole was filled, they'd go off together to wherever it is. Everybody who dies and knows it's coming, I've learned, likes to have a hand in it like that, and you try to oblige. And what about you? Mary Lou asks. I guess I thought it'd be nice to be set on a hill and sometimes be spotted by a bear or a bird or someone out looking for bears or birds. They'd see me sitting against a tree and think, oh, that fellow there is alive. I'd just be another someone else out there leaning against a tree waiting for the next thing to come along. But I know it'd happen different. At some point, a bird or bear or someone out looking for him would figure it out and say, wait a minute, that was a dead man on that hill leaning on a tree. I'm still fine with that. Can't think of another way. How about you? The only thing Mary Lou wants is nothing at all to happen. Buried in the dirt or set on fire or even leaned against a tree are not things she wants. I want to be left alone, she says. I want to know it's coming and have enough time to walk off somewhere private and not feel bad or dizzy or hurt, and to lay down somewhere nice and look up and not mind too much and be able to just look at whatever is up there above me the way you do. Clouds or birds or storms or the moon. I'd listen to whatever made a sound. I don't want hands lifting me off to a strange place or animals hunting along to take me. Just to lay and see clouds and trees and things going by and the moon and have no thoughts, but whatever came overhead was my thought until I blended in and was gone and didn't even know I was there. Carl sits with that a while and moves closer. We can make you a fence somewhere to keep them all out, a little room with a fence going around. How's that? Mary Lou doesn't want a fence going around, but only to see the things going overhead. How in the world can we get you up that hill? She says. Carl laughs so hard she can feel the walls move and the sunlight sway and the bedroll tremble beneath her, their faces close. I guess I shouldn't have wanted a hill and then come live in the only place in the world without one, he says. Carl wakes to bright windows, but it's darker than night inside the station from the pressing glare. The morning has passed, and the midday sun is overhead, and the shadows fall straight down from above, and things outside are only bright. He makes small noises with his feet and fingers, and puts a black cup of coffee near her face, and sits at the window smoking with the binoculars in one hand, and the other hand taking his own cup, or sometimes the cigarette from the ashtray, which is balanced on his thigh, as the cup is when he smokes. Going out to put the stone down now. Come if you like, he says, but to the window. If she wants to sleep, that's fine. He wants to offer. Neither does he want to startle her awake with his voice, nor have her wake up with him not there. Saying this to the window is as close as he can get to leaving a note. He considers a note, but his writing's poor, and writing something down presumptuous. They weren't anywhere near a relationship that allowed for notes. She might wake without him there and not even notice, or be relieved and think nothing of it. Good riddance. But he wants her to go with him, and so he asks, Neither his window voice or small movements nor the scent of the coffee near her face has woken her. He swings off the chair and sets the binoculars on the shelf and finishes the coffee and pushes out the door. Around back of the station, he leads a small gray mule out of an outhouse and hitches her to his two-wheeled wagon. Jessie Stone, with both their names, stands upright on its side in the wagon hutch wired to a plank. He sits in the wagon and leans forward and puffs air to get the mule walking over the land deeper toward the small forest. The mule only likes walking in grass and won't walk down the highway and moves better walking away from it. When they are deep in the field, he lets the mule graze for a while. He watches the meadow frogs leap about, little toys at war. Sometimes the mule snaps at them and sometimes catches them. Carl doesn't know what to make of a mule that eats a frog. He hopes it's nothing but the accident of something stray catching in the mule's mouth. When the mule stills from eating, Carl huffs a breath to turn her toward the road directly and begins to tell her that the road ahead isn't a road at all. Sometimes he says it is a black river, and sometimes a strip of dead land where the grass won't grow. When he comes to the road and the mule stops, he climbs down and sets his arm to bar her eyes and begins to sing her blind across it. The song has words like, "Here we go now, just a few more steps, nothing here to see and nothing to fear, almost there and almost there." His own thought is that the mule doesn't like the sound of its iron feet knocking the pavement, but the mule has never liked the sound of any sound. Even his voice bothers her, and he communicates with her through a series of gasps and sighs and breaths. Maybe she nips at the frogs and eats them because she doesn't like the bleating cry they make through the night. It may be the point of the mule's life on earth to silence all the things she can. Across the road, he boards the wagon, and the mule pulls easily through the grass and races. They run until they come to Emmeline's house, burned flat nearly to the ground now, and a scorch in the earth in the picture of its own shape, but twice as large. Carl can see the line of the roof and the black etch of windows printed in the soot trail along the unburned grass. Small, smokeless campfires burn with flame like pure spirits that waver the area with heat. Mary Lou stands somehow on the far side of the scorch, looking at the small pieces that remain, and as he climbs down from the wagon, she comes over. "Where'd you come from?" he says, but he knows the answer to that. They yank the stone from the hutch and let it thump to earth, and Carl snips the wire and alone begins to flip it end over end until it sits atop the graves. "Well, that's it," he says. "Goodbye, Jessie and Emmeline." If Mary Lou hadn't been there, he might have said another line about resting in peace now, or going on to the greater glory, but he doesn't know where she stands on such likely or unlikely things. Emmeline didn't have a thought for heaven, and Jessie hoped there was more, but was angry about it. "Should be more of a sure thing," Jessie would sometimes say. They climb in together and settle on the bench board, their hips pressed and their shoulders rubbing together like the legs of a different animal that walks above them. Carl says, "You want to see the route now or later?" Already they can see Mr. Lee in his chair up ahead in the field, an old library chair, high-backed with wooden legs. Mr. Lee sits in formal attire, with his arms upon the armrests and his feet planted. Though his back is straight, his head falls in the mild bow of a performer beyond the use of congratulation. As they draw into shorter grass, Mary Lou finds herself unable to look away from what seems a great performance on the art of being seated. There is hardly any division between chair and figure. They are one thing or doing one thing together, or have become the description or the expression of the other. "Mr. Lee," Carl calls down as they arrive before the man. A goat steps out from the longer grass to look at them and then disappears inside it to continue mowing. Mary Lou leaps down from the wagon and collapses to the ground with the feeling of having been pounded from the feet flat up to her head. She stands in a daze and lets it go and pretends it's gone and steps through the goat grass to stand before Mr. Lee to find out what might come next for him. Carl shifts things in the hutch and pulls out a glass gallon of water and a round loaf of bread, which he sets on the ground before Mr. Lee with the weariness of one bringing food to a dangerous animal. "He's young," Mary Lou says, because she thinks Mr. Lee is asleep or dead. She can only see the comb of his dark hair as yet, and is leaning inside the chair to make something of the skin on his face. "I don't know how old he is," Carl says, "but he's not old." Mr. Lee's suit is watercolored and ragged in parts, as though the goat sometimes eats of it, and the jacket is pocked with small tears like gills, and his white shirt has turned tobacco brown. Mary Lou only thinks it might have once been white when she sees the twisted organ around his neck is a bow tie, and that his smooth tan hands are actually gloves. Mr. Lee is in a full tuxedo of a bottom-of-the-sea sort. "Is he dead?" Mary Lou asks. One part of her moves closer, one part away. "He's trying not to itch," Carl says, and nods for them to head back to the wagon. "Good afternoon," Mr. Lee says, when they've both put one foot on the runner to board the wagon. His head rolls backward to the chair, and his eyes crest, and with some intricate detail of energy he smiles, and then pulls forward and rises slowly into standing, drawn up by strings over wooden wheels. Carl turns, but keeps a hand on the wagon, and Mary Lou comes around to her earlier close place. "Let me say thank you for visiting," Mr. Lee says. "How are you?" His face is swelled dark with cuts and rips that look like the ones in his suit, and there is blood in his eyes and lines of blood between his teeth. "Pretty good, Edison. How's things?" Carl says. "Can't complain," Mr. Lee says. His head bows once more for the audience. "You feel like moving to the house yet?" Carl says. Mary Lou sees the speck of the house against the line of the woods. "Got the bed all set? Say the word," Carl says. "Not quite," Mr. Lee says. "Not today. No." His voice rises and holds the sound as though he might change tone and turn the no to a yes. "Mr. Lee played trumpet in the hall," Carl says. "The orchestra," Mr. Lee says. "What's wrong with him?" Mary Lou says. Carl stiffens, and Mr. Lee's head falls once again down. "Cleaned your coat, Edison. Should have brought it today, but we'll bring it tomorrow," Carl says. "Our summer storms are on the way, and that'll keep you warm, though probably not dry." "Wonderful news," Mr. Lee says. "I'm sorry," Mary Lou says. "No," Mr. Lee says. "On no account be sorry. If you like, I can tell you how I came to leave the orchestra." He raises his head again and is trembling with an ice shock, and Mary Lou turns to see Carl's permission, but Carl has sat on the ground and tipped to his side and lies in the goat grass as he did behind the register with his eyes open. "We got plenty of time, Edison," he says, "if you feel up to saying it." Mary Lou stares at Carl for some clue to his collapse, but he tosses a little soil in the air with a weak hand that somehow means, "Don't worry about me. First, I shall sit," Mr. Lee says, and does so, as a king might, to show those wishing for his post that the difficulty of the job is revealed even in such small actions. Even in the lifting of a fork, or the signing of a proclamation, or being seated before one's people to tell them the story of your departure from the orchestra. All are extraordinary clockworks that require meticulous attention and a lifetime of practice. Not easy to be the king, and you don't want to be the king. Mr. Lee says, "If you wouldn't mind coming to me here, I need both my hands locked down tight to the chair." Mr. Lee lowers his arms to the armrests and lets his hands drop over their bulbous ends. Mary Lou steps forward and then looks back at Carl, who throws another handful of dirt to urge her on. "It'll make sense," Carl says when she doesn't move. "Just pin his hands down so he can't scratch himself, because it brings the itch out when he tells it. But don't worry, 'cause he's weak as water." She drops her hands over Mr. Lee's and feels the stiff gloves collapse like paper for far too long before she feels his bones, which seem to hardly rise above the cushions of the chair. "Don't worry, it's not contagious," Mr. Lee says. "I should have said that from the start." He's already struggling against her, and she pushes harder down until he stills. "Thank you," he says. "That's how to do it." Mary Lou finds her eyes have closed to focus on the bones against the cushions to make sure Mr. Lee stays put, but she hears in his voice a rising clarity and opens her eyes to see him looking at her. His eyes are the royal brown-gray of the fur of an animal. "Thank you," he says again. "I'll begin to struggle now, but it weakens me if you hold me with your eyes like this," he says, and leans forward to lock his eyes further onto hers. "Only hands and eyes could hold him down. That's what I'd like it to be said of me." He blinks in a slow, rust way. The lids close down like the small metal doors of different buildings on stuck hinges. One eye scrapes and the other flickers. Equally, they open with the same hardship, and a spring of water floods each eye, and more blood fills in behind. There is somewhere on my body, hidden, as yet unknown, something which some would call simply an itch. Mr. Lee shakes forward from the idea and mention of his itch, and his hands try to rise from the armrests, and both feet pound, and she can feel the arm bones bending as wires in the wind, but she holds his hands and eyes until he stops. "This is an itch that cannot be found in any location on my person. It is also that of a deep pain and ongoing lust. It roves about me freely as its own creature, with new locations announced, which lead me on long journeys to find the source, as I believe I will at last find it, and erase it, and walk from this field directly back to the hall. Yet no matter how sharp my nails, or thorough my search, I can never connect the scratch to the itch. Nothing else is needed to ruin a man's life but that, and that is how I left the orchestra. That's as much as I can say for now," he says. Mr. Lee is trembling, and his eyes stuck differently open and closed. "Now," he says, quieting, "if you would be so kind as to tell me the story of a pond, I can be safely left alone to myself here." Carl has come to stand behind her. His hands and arms have fallen over her to pin her shoulders as she has pinned Mr. Lee's hands. Just tell him there's a pond, Carl says. His weight comes down more upon her as a force for her to speak, and she begins to lower to the ground in what seems to be a fall. A pond, she says. A pond somewhere, Mr. Lee says. His breath hitches as he waits to inhale the details of a pond. What pond? She says, and Carl presses down further and speaks above her head like a storm moving in. Just tell him there's a pond, Carl says again. She stands into him and pushes him as though to throw him off, and he slides some down her back. She lifts her hands from Mr. Lee's and releases him, and finds there is a place between them where their eyes can better meet, and she says, I only know about one pond, I guess, if that's what you mean. That is the pond I mean, Mr. Lee says. It was the first pond I ever saw, Mary Lou says. The only pond, the last pond. When I saw it, I thought, well, that's what a pond is. The word came to me the moment I saw it, and I thought I came up with the name of a pond myself. In those days, I thought that about things like dogs and cats and windows, that I came up with the names. The way I'd come upon a silver bit of river that was called a stream, or down further where the stream broke down, it was called a brook, and how when it began to die, it was called a creek. She takes a step back and stands to carry Carl away with her and to hold Mr. Lee's eyes from further away. The pond was small, with yellow lily flowers and frogs along the edges that I thought were leaves until they jumped in as I went around. It was the shape of a circle, and the trees hung over it like drinking animals, and I was young enough to think this was the one pond the world had for us, and I was the one that named it pond. Yes, Mr. Lee says. His head is falling forward, his breath grown easy. She pushes against Carl's falling weight to get him back on his own feet, and he draws her stumbling into the side of the wagon. Mary Lou keeps them standing and holds eyes with Mr. Lee. Carl lunges into the hutch as onto a passing train, and Mary Lou pushes at his backside and lifts his cold, hard feet to get more of his weight onto the back, and then she crawls over him and sits in the bench and blows a sigh as Carl had done, and the mule trots off like it was already underway. Carl's feet slip through the grass, and the goat comes out to watch his toes run animal-like through the blades to make sure his pecking feet aren't eating any of the grass. There's a pond, Mary Lou calls. Carl's feet rush the thicker grass, and the goat turns to watch Mr. Lee find his settlement with the chair and their expression of each other in the field, and what they both are now. They ride across the grassy field, house to house, on this side of the road. At the edge of each yard, the mule stops without urging, and Mary Lou climbs down, and Carl will look up at where they are and say a variation of a dry food and a liquid. Box of cereal, milk, he'll say, and she'll bring these up and set them on the porch beside the door. At the next stop, bread and lemonade, and just go in and put them on the table. At each house, someone watches from a room or a window like a cat or child. In such quiet ways, Mary Lou supposes these observers believe themselves unseen. She feels no obligation to let them have this privacy. She waves and glances at them to let them know she sees them. If they don't want to be seen, they shouldn't look. At a third farmhouse, potatoes, whiskey, A freshly shaved middle-aged man sits in a robe and sleeping cap smoking at a kitchen table. An empty glass before him and a knife, and as soon as she sets the bottle down, he pours himself a full glass and drinks it down and is cutting the potatoes into small shapes. So quickly does he take delivery that Mary Lou has no choice but to watch. She is shifting the paper bag of potatoes to the table as the man takes his first whiskey sips. Even before she's set the bag down, he has plucked a potato from the sack with a smacking apple sound and begun carving it up. She reaches to take it back, and he slaps her hand with the flat of the knife. "Hello," Mary Lou says. "Not for long," he says. A cigarette stabs from the left side of his mouth, and that side of his face is a wedge as the smoke arrows his closed eye. He sips whiskey and cuts potatoes, and smoke shoots into his eye. When he says, "Not for long," his words overlap with her hello in the barging way he takes things before she gives them. It is not a delivery, but a collision. What she brought and his response lay together in a tangled mess, in pieces on the table with the cut potatoes. She turns away, wondering if there is something here to report. She has a fear of an accident or something being wrong inside her, of something broken or bad having happened. In the wagon, she wants to tell Carl about the man, but he must already know, and she puffs a breath and the mule walks on. They are all nearly the same farmhouse, painted with the same bucket of white paint and same brush, but laid out like an experiment of beakers on a shelf, where each beaker is filled with the same amount of water, but subjected to an intrusive element. A grain of sand in one, a rock in another, a drop of ink in a third. The mule has stopped for some reason mid-field, and as there are no reins to guide her, all Mary Lou can do is huff and sigh to speak her desire that they move along. She looks at last to the hutch to ask Carl what can be done, and sees that he is gone. She climbs down and sifts through the bags of food and the grilled box of glass bottles, and lifts the burlap cover that can be drawn over the hutch like a lid, but he is nowhere. The wheels of the wagon have folded the grass silver, and she walks back through it until she finds him buried in the grasses. She rolls him onto his back to extricate him from the grass. His eyes are open, and he is breathing. "Can you stand or sit?" she asks. Carl licks wet lips with a dry tongue and takes a deep breath and tightens in her grasp in an effort to get up. She returns to the wagon and gets the bottle he'd stowed by his feet and brings it to him and helps him sip. Then she takes the box of cigarettes from his pockets and lights two with his matches and sets the pack and the matches on his chest and sets the bottle in his hand and one cigarette between his lips. "Some hill," he says. "I'll look for one," she says. "Even a little one," he says. "Even smaller than that," she says. She places her thumb on his forehead as a kind of wax seal of her promise of a hill, and she goes back to the wagon and sits. When she blows out a commanding sigh, it is not a question, and the mule takes on forward through the grass to the next white house with its grain of sand or little rock or drop of ink within. For the whole of the day, up and down the highway in the farm fields, she watches for the merest change in the line of the land and for any break or rise, but sees nothing but the tiny dip of a small valley near the distant carriage bridge, where she'd once heard a train cross, and calling out its warning to the winning of a lottery, with bells and whistle blasts. The falling dip isn't a hill from here, but a hill could be salvaged from its lowest point. To the rest of the people, hiding behind the curtains or creaking steps in the floors above, she leaves them alone. It's not privacy they want, but a way to erase the distance. She leaves them where they are, which is as far away as she can. Most of the people she visits that day stay hidden inside behind curtains, or sit silently on porches in wheelchairs or rockers with blankets on their laps or shawls around their shoulders. She ignores the outside people who look at her and tries to feel from the houses or the faces and the eyes she sees what such people might want from the hutch: water, sweet tea, lemonade, bread, cereal, chips. There are a few sandwiches in flask-like bottles set together in paper bags in their own box, and she feels right assuming those wanting such things would verify their delivery. After a few guesswork drops that leave her uneasy, she begins to call out her deliveries, opening front doors to say, "I've got your tea and bread, and I'll set them down here at the door, or bring them to you if you want, or if you want something different, I'll get something different." At best, she'll hear a footstep in a room above, or a creak of someone leaning into a door, or a soft voice that says something she can't hear but thinks is acceptance. At the end of the line of homes on this side of the road, as she nears the railroad tracks, she finds a bright-eyed man sitting on his steps with his arms spread wide to receive a granddaughter who might be running toward him. Marilou reaches for the special flask and sandwich bag, and the old fellow, in striped pajamas and shiny brown slippers, receives them with relief. "That's what it is," he says, looking into the bag and shifting his gaze between the treasures of flask and sandwich. He sets his bag down on the stairs and says, "I guess he's done, yeah?" And Marilou looks back over the fields and can't find the word yet for what Carl is. "Did he do the practice of what I taught him?" the old fellow says. He moves so fast she can't track his in-betweens, a still, then twitchy squirrel. "I don't know that he did," she says. "He wasn't one for remedies," the old man says. "Started him off with my Harrietta's Guide to a Long Life, worked for her and worked for me, but now she's gone, having lived some bit longer than she should have because of her guide. I've added some things of my own to the routine, if you care to learn, and call it Milton Steps, because I'm Milton." Milton stands at the top of the stairs on his way back inside, and for a moment he extends his hand to shake, but then heads inside, assuming she won't care to learn Harrietta's Guide or Milton Steps, or to even meet him. But Marilou can hear the train arriving, still well off in the distance, but closing, and the sound of the wheels on the track roll wet in the air instead of dry, and she wants to time her arrival at the tracks to see the event up close and to view the tumultuous expression of the world beyond, still booming with life, like a bullet shot past her eyes. She tells Milton her name and extends her hand, and he waves it off as though that time has passed. But he sets his bag down and comes beside her and begins to adjust her body like a mannequin. "Okay, shoulders back," he says, and pushes her back and slips his finger under her arms. "Hope you ain't ticklish," he says, and lifts her into the air. "Let your back slip out straight and quick as you can, 'cause I ain't the young Milton no more," he says. "The young Milton could have walked you to the fair and back with just one hand." She looses her body, and her spine knocks on the wood of small doors, and her legs grow longer as he sets her down and pushes at her shoulders again. In the pressure against her shoulder, she feels the blackness of her jaw, and a pumping of blood freed up to flow by his touch, and now gathering readily in the black veins in her neck. "Head up and arms out wide like this," he says. And she does this, and he raises her arms further still, and then stands before her in the same way. "Couple of airplanes flying along," he says. Milton lifts one leg until the knee is above the hip, and then stretches the leg in a long chicken step as far and as straight as he can. He is already trembling backward in his belly with the holding energy to stay balanced on one slippered foot. He tips toward the faraway leg while shaking and leaning his weight back over the planted foot before setting the other foot down. His weight shifts onto the stepped-away foot, and he lifts the back leg up high into the air behind him and grunts toward the ground and drops a stream of drool, and his arms strike out and flutter as he brings this back leg forward and below him in a wide arc, and he flings his chest to the sky before slowly setting the foot down. Milton bucks through his spine to crack the bones and rolls his head to jelly his neck, but no sounds of cracking come. A spotty, dirty sweat springs down his forehead and over the backs of his hands, and he nods for her to try. This is the bowling alley and the bowling ball all over again, and Mary Lou crouches halfway over and extends a crooked leg and takes the largest and slowest step she can over the grasses and tries with the other leg, but finds herself tipping to the ground. Milton shoves her with his hip to keep her up and laughs at the hit he's made, but she strikes back with her own hip, and he stumbles into a series of Milton steps until he spills to the ground, laughing still. A fellow for whom violence and loving resolve in laughter. If she was running, she could make the Milton steps work, but the slowness of the practice is the problem. Running, she would go leaping over holes in the highway like the officer and the woman. It ain't easy, Milton says. He's crawled over himself and pushed up into standing with his arms and legs coming together like a ladder. He stands on one foot on the porch eating his lunch and drinking whatever the booze is and sticks out a hand again to shake, but withdraws it. Mary Lou breathes the mule away, and Milton performs his Milton steps with the sandwich and bottle in hand, looking like a long-legged bird hunting small fish in the seashore of his front porch. The trestle runs over a channel of sand and buck rock that is a river during the summer flood season. The silver railroad tracks break the line of trees and make a space into the distance, and she can see the train like a faraway trembling door and hear it coming. Its alarms and rattling weight reflect in the leaves and hum the dirt. She gets off the wagon to look at the forest through the break the rails have made. From the road she'd seen the distant trees on either side as a darkness on the horizon, the mane of a horse. Riding closer, she'd seen lone trees appear, but she'd assumed vast wilderness went rolling flatly onward forever. Through the opening the tracks have made to the open fields beyond, she watches a car going down the road between white houses like the one she'd come down. She crosses the trestle, staying atop one of the silver rails, and on the far side she walks through the breach and sees the forest as nothing but a narrow strip of trees, and not a forest at all, but a fence that hides these similar-looking worlds from each other. On this far side is nothing too different. Far-off farmhouses, a highway down the middle, a bucket gas station with a pail handle over the top, a red phone booth. Gradually, she's permitted to see what's there in her peripheral vision. A good deal more life resolves on this side than on first glance. Men in trucks plow the fields and stand with cattle and roll up ropes, and women pin clothes on long flapping lines between antennas, some in wide hats crouching in the fields in small dusty bands as they draw out what they find, and flashes of children run behind houses. After these people have squeezed the life out of their side of the line of trees and done what they came to do, they'll just walk through the breach until they find a house on Mary Lou's side, like the one they used to have on theirs. She walks back over the tarred wooden ties, doing Milton steps now, taking longer, slower steps with winged arms leaning forward above a placed foot, then hauling back to face the sky in a kind of lurching forward and falling back and staying on one foot, with the one planted foot hardly ever holding to the center of her being. She watches the train rocket by with her hands over her ears, and watches the mule make little jumps as though it sees a smaller train rumbling beneath its legs. The train is only a few cars long and rings its bells and hoots and screeches to a long halt at the intersection with the road, where she sees the officer standing and waiting beside his car with the yellow lights on. She is back in the wagon, rolling beside the dry river, looking for a spot with a tree for Carl, but she keeps her side view on the officer, who takes down boxes from a pair of arms on the train and loads his car full, and even puts the overflow boxes on the hood and roof and trunk, which he doesn't tie down but shoves together like lumps of clay. She watches him pull away from the tracks as slowly as the train pulls away, another version of it. There are many things in duplication here beside the fields with the fence of trees. There is the train like a skyscraper dragged across the world. There is the mule's train that slipped between its hooves. The officer and his car, a makeshift satellite of the train, taking what was once a part of it off with him to where he's going. Mary Lou considers if the boxes balancing atop the car and pressed together like clay contain all the things she keeps in the hut behind her, and if so, isn't she just another train? A series of trains of ever looser and more human design. The almost final train would be a man or woman sitting at home, handing the bread and water into their bodies to become the final leg of the journey, and then to return such ever-gathered things back to the earth like rain. The mule comes to a halt at the road, and Mary Lou coaxes it forward with a hiss, but the old mule stops and pulls away and begins to step backwards. She removes Carl's hat, which is her hat now, but still his, and still, too, the run-over hat in the lot, and sets the hat over the mule's right eye and covers the left eye with her hand to draw her across the road blind. The mule takes dainty steps, trying to stop the hooves from touching the hard pavement and recoiling when they strike. Mary Lou mutters sounds and louder sounds before the hooves hit to erase their glass clicks, and they cross the road in grunts and blindness. When she's back on the wagon, the mule bolts hard for the far trees, and Mary Lou drops into the space between the bench and the footstop to keep from falling off until they stop. More faces and windows and still figures on porches on this side of the road. She calls out what she brings into unlit homes, and sometimes hears a sound of thanks or a footstep or a creak of someone leaning on a door. It's privacy they want, she decides, and she waves to curtain faces or says, "I hear you up there," to the footsteps. At the end of the day, as she heads back to the Starlight, she stops at the ringing phone booth and leaves the mule mid-field and the wagon empty now, and walks 100 yards through the grass to answer it. It is Alice or old Frederick calling, but no one says the first thing. She listens to the offshore winds and hangs up. Out of the booth, she sees the mule already arrived at the outhouse behind the station, head slung low and its rear shimmying at the harness as though trying to drop it like a pair of pants. She walks up the road as the sun falls and the police car comes alongside her with its jumbling roof boxes, but Mary Lou won't get in. The window rolls down and the officer mutters something hushed and buzzy that she can't hear, and the door opens and she shuts it. They go beside each other like ancient man and the old cow, but Mary Lou isn't sure which one she is. He isn't a policeman, she sees in the corner of her vision, nor is this a police car. He is a mailman in a decorated suit, with badges and epaulets as might have been earned in days when the figure of the postman was seen alongside the likes of airline pilots and ice cream attendants in the beautiful ensembles of once glamorous trades that each delivered some exotic gift from the unknown far away. She gets in the car, and the postman drives them down the road in the car's hidden cave of boxes. The postman sets the car into the laneless middle and heaves himself across the space between seats to observe the goings-on outside the car as a child might tear between the windows of a train to see the different passings of land beyond. He has no trouble using her far thigh as a handle to pull himself across to her side, which becomes a heavy punch to her leg over time, as the pressure turns the hinge in her knee into the cold place it wants to become. Although the boxes on the hood jostle apart and sometimes make to fall off the sides, they gently shake back to some force of the world that keeps a larger order of such things. The hanging chimney of the bucket station that falls along the sky had seemed until now only a kind of wasted shape curving above the roof where once a great sign had hung, a collapsing black pipe, broken free and fallen into a slouched lattice that makes the suggestion of the handle of a pail, which gives the station its bucket shape. The postman has the name Charlie affixed by a taped lapel over his chest pocket. Colored patches fill in the space above, which might be awards for services rendered. Charlie lets go the hold of her leg and straightens it into a bar to brace for impact. The hinge in her knee shoots a lightning bolt down to her ankle with the release, and then traces back up her whole body, and she startles and freezes on the edge of a fit. Right before they hit, Charlie turns the knob on a button panel overhead to begin the swirl of yellow lights, and a second switch beside it is toggled as well, and a warning siren whines, too quiet to attract the attention of anyone nearby. Mary Lou has to press the bone of her cheek to the window to catch the vibration of the human-sounding siren. "Is that you?" she says. Charlie blushes and shrugs with pride or horror and stiffens his bar arm, such things too private to say. The switch he'd thrown has started a cassette spinning in the panel above. A radio handset is clipped to the ceiling with a hanging coil. Because the sound of the siren buzzes in the not-there way of Charlie's own voice, Mary Lou supposes he's made the siren from the scratch of his own little voice. They strike directly into a pylon beside the pump, and all the boxes on the roof and the hood tumble off like thrown dice. Charlie smiles and waits for her to see his smile so she can grasp this moment of cascade and carnage as an item of possible enjoyment. "We can make our work fun and still earn service patches," his smile says. He reverses gear and shoots backward and slams the brakes, and the boxes on the trunk roll to the ground. He reaches across and opens her door, and Mary Lou says, "Well, that's quite a mess, Charlie, I think." She takes his hat from the hook he hangs it from in the ocean of the rear seats, where it swings as an exotic object, like a chandelier on a ship. Charlie reaches for the hat, but she sweeps it away and leaves the car to survey his delivery of a dozen brown boxes, 2 of which are wooden crates, and 1 of which is a case of beer. The cans inside certainly pressurized to the full and hissing now audibly at the seams. As Charlie gets out to retrieve his hat, she holds it away and shows her eyes at the mess of boxes. This is the sort of pantomime Charlie can work with. He lifts and carries the boxes into the station without irritation or her help, and when he's done, she places the hat on his head and pops it down, and he's never once been so happy. Charlie removes it at once to make his thanks before setting it firmly down once more and removing it almost immediately as he climbs back into the car. He turns and sets the hat on the hook and gives it a tap to make it swing. Mary Lou sits on the bar stool at the window and watches him slip into the distance. The light spins yellow circles and his siren voice wails to the edges of the car. She has a beer at her lips and a cigarette in the ashtray on her thigh when Charlie drives off the road into the field and into the silver sway the Valiant made when it went there, and owl time returns. Tick. She works to draw the can ever closer to her lips as Charlie sits in the field before the typewriter and begins to type. In the morning she loads fresh bags and boxes into the hutch and opens them to find the same supplies from the day before. Bare loaves of bread and water bottles and paper bags with sandwiches and flasks. She hitches the mule by means of 2 small hooks on twine that set into a man's leather belt that goes around the mule's neck, and they go off deep into the fields to make their rounds. She finds old Frederick on the floor again, in his spill of cowboy clothes, and gets him onto the bed and sets his bread under the glass with the butter on top in the kitchen. He says there is no need to bring it to him today, as a special guest is coming. Along the rope-slung trees not far from her back door, Mary Lou finds the special guest, tugging herself along in her wheelchair with the 2-armed effort of a mountaineer. Mary Lou comes behind her and pushes her along the network of ropes as the beaten path makes the chair roll easy, and because it is otherwise difficult to make out where old Frederick's house might be through the maze of trees and ropes. At the houses with the watching faces and bodies leaning into doors, she continues to call out her deliveries, and the only change is in a kind of stepping toward. The faces are not hiding now, but freely watching. The footsteps in the floors above are several, and the creakings many and unworried. The privacy has split in 2, both wanted and rejected, and can't be navigated with either refusal or acceptance. A wrong question with a wrong answer that is just a demand for the coming moment not to come. One woman in a picture window moves aside a lace to wave to her, and one too large man pushes through a door frame and grunts at her and extends a paddle hand, and she gives him a bottle and a bag of crackers in a steepled box. She neither looks nor speaks to them nor waves now, but they listen together instead to the house in the fields equivalent of offshore winds. Mr. Lee sits hunched in his chair and possibly nods as she collects the half-drunk bottle and half-eaten bread, both smeared with fragments of blood that fall off as gold flake into the dirt. She stands with him a moment to bring him the image of the pond and the drinking trees and the leaves becoming frogs leaping among the lilies. At Milton's she finds not Milton making his portrait steps, but a taller, younger woman in a cotton gown and ballet slippers pacing the porch with a book balanced on her head. Mary Lou sets 2 bags down on the porch, unsure if there are 2 who live here, and watches Henrietta practice her way from one side to the other, sometimes stopping to reset the book on her head. Milton told her that Henrietta was dead, yet here the woman is. This isn't a story Mary Lou wants to know the end or beginning or corners of. Henrietta would only tell the story of Milton and his steps being the one long gone, and Mary Lou can make enough of their story without any more of it. She takes one of the bags off the porch and returns to the wagon as the book falls from Harrietta's head. She follows the mirror-like shimmer the wagon made yesterday in the grass and finds Carl unmoving where he is. She climbs down and feels his stiffness and tries to curl him upward old Frederick style like linoleum, but he is a plank of wood. Already he is emptying of the heaviness of his body, his liquids dropping into the ground and dissolving into the air. In a day or two he'll be light as linen, and when he is, she will take him. In the morning, before leaving, she sat at the window in her hat and shirt and drank a warm beer and smoked a dry cigarette and hoped soon she'd have a need for the binoculars, for she found herself longing to see anyone in the world come driving by, just to be sure that someone still was there. The sunlight rustled over the fields as of a blanket dragging along, and was not at all like the real light of the day that climbed, ant-like, over all it could. This was more a colored wind stretching over the land without settling, and it moved with the feeling of clouds passing. There were no cars, and the look of quietness was something she could see like an emptiness, and feel in her hands like softness. The side of her face was numb, and she wondered whether she'd locked a hand against her cheek all night long as she'd slept if she had, or whether the black lines were breaking full in knots and bubbles. Beneath the outlined numbness of her jaw and neck, something pulsed with the colored warmth of light that crossed the fields. Perhaps a new cheek or side of her face was being born below the dead part, and would struggle up through her jaw and bloom like grass. It would come of a sudden turn of thought like this, and with a warning sign of hope, as though all was being undone and all soon well. But when she stood, the numbness spilled from the outline down her left side, and the vision in her right eye glistened. Down the road outside the window, the blue bubble car floated by like a children's balloon, and she heard it only after it was gone, and a turned towel of sand spun along after it. She set the lens of the binoculars against the glass to look, and watched the bubble car pull to the side of the road, and the woman get out and stand for a photograph. She set the binoculars back on the beam and finished the beer and went outside to set the mule strings and rode into the deep field the other way, with the wagon empty now for Carl. She blew a sigh, and the mule turned back toward the road until it came to its road-hating halt. The bubble car drove back through the distance to pass again before the station. She watched it leaving and stopping and turning back to make its smaller interval. When it had come around again, she walked out of the grass and lifted the Miller High Life can and sipped down a newly settled drop that had gathered over time. She dug into the sand and found a purple zippered case buried there that somehow looked like it had been made by the woman and her bubble car together. She slipped the purple bag into her pocket and dropped the can to the ground and crossed over the road and went into the silver flats her Valiant and Charlie's legs had made until she found the typewriter and umbrella side by side in a settled rut like an old married couple on a picnic. As she sat down, it began to rain. She opened the umbrella and sat in a tiny night and looked at the paper and what was written on it, and then pulled it out and folded it up and put it in her pocket with the rest. It was the letter from the hospital she'd put in the envelope for Walter to read, which meant that Walter had searched the world over to find the typewriter in the field, so he might slip the note under its band to let her know he'd read it and would be all right. She went back to the mule and set her hat over its one eye and cupped the other and carried the umbrella over both their heads as she drew the mule in its dancing way across the road as its mouth bit the air to eke the sounds of its striking feet, and she didn't make a sound to help. She drove out into the field deep to the old Frederick and Alice side, and began to pass near the white farms, each with their small infraction of a stone or grain of sand or drop of ink. She found Carl had loosened in the limbs during the night in such a way that he almost folded like a sheet, and she lifted him into her arms and laid him in the hutch. She spread him back into shape and put his bare feet side by side and crossed his arms atop his chest, and there was her wallet grasped in his left hand where she supposed she'd seen it before as he made his shapes in sunlight. She lifted his head and took off the road hat and set it over his hair as a trade for the wallet. She sat on the bench and held the umbrella over Carl to keep him light and dry so that he wouldn't put on any of the weight of the falling rain. The bubble car was in the lot now and the woman outside it and pushing it along toward the pump. Marilou blew another sigh and the mule hitched into a trot as though the sound she'd made was a sign the rain was raining and the floods coming that the mule would otherwise refuse to note without being told it was so. The mule stopped dead at the train tracks, and Marilou climbed down and took the sheet of Carl into her arms and descended the grade below the trestle into the abandoned slough of sand and buck rock and sticks and tied-up piles and the shipwrecked bones of fish. A taken picture of how the river died into the moment of its passing like a smoke trail from a chimney train that settled over the land and said, a train once was here, with these different people aboard and all they'd carried with them, and left somehow behind in the smoke. She walked along the riverbed until the trestle fell behind her far enough, and then she knelt into the bank and ascended toward the trees, rain-black at the top and like sand at the bottom. She lowered Carl on the bank and pulled him along to the trunk of the tree and then leaned against it herself to see how it sat, and then she pushed him up along the groove of the bark where her own spine had settled. She lifted his legs before him and propped one knee and dug his heel into the sand on the high bank to anchor him and set his head back and press their hat down again into his hair. If she had had a fishing rod, she might have put it in his hands and cast the line out over the river and set the hook to the shipwrecked bones. She buried the head of a stick into the earth beside his thigh and propped his arm atop it until he looked like a man who happened to be waiting for the river to come running back. The rain fell straight and gave the illusion you could laugh your way through each drop to safety, dry. She lit a cigarette and struck it between his teeth, and she smoked too. The tree rising above them made the corner of a dry room for them to wait. The rain had gathered enough to make a pencil line down the sandy belly of the channel, like a river on a map, flat on the page now, but a creek soon. Then a brook, a silver stream, a rolling river, and a man to watch it pass. The more river there was, the more alive he'd seem. A full river would bring the fruit of birds to the trees. The bushes that grew atop the buck rock would be bears. No car to drive, no shoes to wear, no coats to clean. She said these words, but into herself, where she could listen to Carl listening back for each one in the offshore winds. Marilou pressed her thumb against his forehead and walked back along the trickle of the creek and up the dip to the mule and climbed into the wagon to ride home to see the woman who'd just arrived. The end. Thanks so much for listening. For more information, visit my website at radioghost.com.